The courtroom had always smelled like old wood, ink, and cold ambition. It was something Naima Reyes could never forget. Even after 16 years, that scent haunted her, soaked into the fibers of her childhood, stitched into the seams of every broken dream she had stitched back together with trembling hands. She sat now in the back pew of the Hamilton County Courthouse, her notepad in her lap, eyes sharp behind square-framed glasses. To the world, she was just another legal assistant, diligent, composed, unnoticed. But her gaze was not on the defense table. Not on the prosecutor. It stayed fixed, unwavering, on the man seated at the highest bench. Judge Elwin Mercer. The man who had sentenced her mother to 15 years in state prison on a first-degree larceny charge. A charge based on falsified evidence, coerced testimony, and silence, his silence. She was 10 when they took her mother away. Naima could still hear the crack in her mother's voice when she looked back over her shoulder and whispered, "Baby, be good. Don't cry." She hadn't cried. Not then. Not when she was shuffled through the foster system. Not when her foster parents forgot to pick her up from school. Not even when her mother died in prison from an untreated infection. But now, in this courtroom, the tears trembled behind her eyes, shackled by rage. "Your Honor," a smooth voice broke the silence of her mind. Julian Mercer. His son. He stood at the center of the courtroom, a tailored navy suit hugging his tall frame, dark curls falling just above his brows. He looked nothing like his father, except for the same deliberate way of speaking, measured, intelligent, sincere. Our client was not read his Miranda rights. The video footage clearly shows the officer proceeded to question Mr. Dorsey after detaining him, without informing him of his constitutional protections. Julian paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for justice. For procedure. For the kind of fairness that this court prides itself on." His voice was low, calm, but his conviction was palpable. Naima felt a pang. It wasn't the first time she'd seen him in court. She'd watched him from the shadows of the gallery more times than she could count over the last 6 months. It should have been easy to hate him. But nothing about Julian Mercer was easy. She'd met him on a Tuesday, in the back hallway of the Community Legal Defense Center. He'd come to deliver some filings on behalf of a public defender, arms full of case folders and an expression of quiet exasperation. She was on her knees in the storage closet, digging through 6 months of misfiled documents. Hi," he said, peeking in. "I was told to drop these here, but I'm starting to think this place might be a front for something way less organized than law." She arched an eyebrow. "If you're looking for order, you've taken a wrong turn somewhere near the Bar Association." His laugh had been soft and boyish. He asked if she wanted a coffee the next day. They got tacos instead. She never told him her last name. Now, 6 months later, she sat in this courtroom, watching the man she cared for argue with passion, argue for justice, as the man who had stolen everything from her sat 15 feet away. "Motion to suppress is granted," Judge Mercer announced. Julian nodded, quietly triumphant. His eyes scanned the courtroom, and landed on her. A flicker of warmth passed between them. Naima dropped her gaze. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun filtered through the budding trees. The protesters across the street, Mothers Against Wrongful Incarceration, chanted softly as police watched from a distance. Naima waited until most of the spectators had cleared before stepping out. "I thought that was you," Julian said behind her. His voice still startled her. She turned slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here," he added, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You usually avoid this courthouse like it owes you money." "Maybe I came for the drama," she replied, lips twitching. "Or maybe the coffee machine broke at the office." Julian's smile faded a little, replaced by something more serious. "You okay?" She hated how much that question disarmed her. "Yeah," she lied. "Just, rough week." He stepped closer, close enough that she caught the familiar scent of cedar and paper. "Come over tonight," he said softly. "No court talk. No politics. Just bad food and that movie I keep promising to hate watch with you." She hesitated. Her fingers brushed against the hidden compartment in her satchel. The flash drive inside held everything. Financial records. Testimony. A letter from a dying clerk who had confessed it all. Proof that Judge Mercer had sentenced over 24 defendants under illegal influence, including her mother. If she gave that drive to the right reporter, Mercer's career would be over. Julian's life would unravel. But wasn't that justice? Wasn't that the oath she'd taken the day her mother died? "Sure," she said quietly. "I'll come." His apartment was a few blocks from the river, in a converted loft that smelled like vanilla, old books, and lavender detergent. She loved it more than she admitted, loved the framed art prints, the cozy blanket on the couch, the mismatched mugs that always seemed warm when he handed them to her. He handed her a beer and kicked off his shoes. Tonight's feature presentation, Aliens vs. Lawyers. She laughed, despite herself. They curled into the couch, his hand resting gently over hers. Somewhere in the middle of a ridiculous chase scene, she looked at him. Really looked. The man she had fallen in love with didn't know he was part of the reason her life had imploded. Didn't know the name Reyes used to echo across his father's courtroom. Didn't know he was the son of a man who sentenced an innocent woman to die in a cell. And when he looked back at her with that same trusting softness, she wanted to scream. Instead, she kissed him. It was a slow, aching thing. His lips were warm, hesitant at first, then sure. It wasn't new, they'd kissed before, but this time, something was different. This time, she knew what she was going to do. Hours later, after he'd fallen asleep beside her, Naima slipped out from under the blanket and padded into the living room. She stood in front of his father's framed photo on the shelf. Elwyn Mercer, smiling, an award in one hand and Julian in the other, no more than 16 at the time. "You never deserved him," she whispered. Her hand shook as she reached into her satchel. The flash drive glinted under the moonlight. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she walked. From Julian's apartment to the river. From the river to the old neighborhood, where her mother's face was still painted on a brick wall near 43rd and Main. Rosa Reyes, gone, but not silent. Naima sat on the curb and wept for the first time in years. In the morning, her phone buzzed. "Julian. Julian. You okay? You were gone when I woke up. I miss you already." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop. And drafted the press release. The bell above the bookstore door gave a reluctant jingle, the kind that said "I've seen better days." Rafiq Dawes looked up from his ledger, pen frozen mid-column. It was late October. The golden leaves that clung to the sycamore tree outside danced with the breeze, casting amber light into the tiny shop. Everything in the town of Autumn Grace had a story to it, some whispered, some shouted from rooftops. And his bookstore, tucked between a faded diner and a forgotten barber shop, was one of its last honest echoes. And she had just walked back into it. Lena Bowen. He knew it was her from the moment the door creaked open. Some things don't fade, no matter how many years or heartbreaks have passed. "Hey," she said quietly, brushing strands of wind-blown hair from her cheek. "Hey," he echoed, though the word caught like gravel in his throat. She hadn't changed much. Still the same honey-brown eyes that could turn winter into warmth. Still that quiet strength in her posture. The years had added something, though, regret, maybe. Or wisdom. Maybe both. "I heard about your brother," she said, her voice careful. Rafiq's jaw tightened. "Bit late to offer condolences, isn't it?" She looked down, a flicker of shame crossing her face. "I came to testify, Rafiq. They called me as a character witness for the appeal. I didn't know, I didn't realize that he'd hang himself in a prison cell," he cut in. "Yeah. Neither did I. Guess the wrong kind of justice doesn't come with warnings." Silence stretched between them. Rafik turned back to his ledger, pretending to count inventory, though he couldn't focus on numbers. Not when the girl who used to read Neruda to him under street lamps was standing in the same air again. "I didn't know what they were doing to him," she said softly. "I didn't know the evidence was planted. They told me he confessed." "He didn't," Rafik snapped. "He begged them to test the prints. The alibi. Anything. But your father," he bit the words off like poison. "Judge Raymond Bowen. Lena's father. The man who had presided over Amir Daw's trial. The man who sentenced him to 25 years for a robbery that never happened. A conviction based on a single blurry camera angle and the shaky testimony of a frightened store clerk. Amir died 2 years into that sentence. And Lena? She'd vanished. Once, they were inseparable. Lena and Rafik, 2 kids who shared headphones on park benches and kisses behind poetry books. Her laugh had been his favorite sound. And then the trial happened. And she disappeared like a ghost. No notes. No explanations. Until now. "I didn't come to reopen old wounds," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Funny," he murmured. "Because it sure feels like you did. I came because I found something." That made him pause. She reached into her coat pocket and slid a folded envelope across the counter. "My father died last spring. Lung cancer. The kind that doesn't ask questions before it takes everything." Rafik said nothing. He wasn't sure what response grief deserved when it wore the face of the man who stole your brother's future. "While sorting through his things, I found this." He opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside, a typed confession. Unsigned. But bearing his father's judicial letterhead. "I was pressured into upholding the prosecution's motion to exclude key evidence. I believed the boy was guilty, as they told me. But I knew, deep down, we'd cut corners. And I was too much a coward to speak." Rafik read the words twice. Then a third time. "This real?" "I've verified the typewriter," she said. "The paper stock. Even found a copy of the letter saved to an old hard drive. It's real." He looked at her, heart a knot of fury and disbelief. "You're giving this to me?" "I'm giving it to whoever can help us get your brother's name cleared." His voice cracked. "He's already dead, Lena. His name isn't." They sat in silence for a long while after that. She sipped black coffee from one of the chipped mugs he kept behind the register. He stared at a dust-speckled sunbeam as it climbed the floorboards. "Why did you leave?" he asked eventually. She looked up. Her eyes were damp but clear. "Because I was afraid. Of what it meant. Of loving you and watching your family get destroyed by mine. I didn't know how to stay, when staying meant choosing sides." "You chose one anyway," he said bitterly. She nodded. "I know." The next few weeks moved like molasses, slow, sweet, and heavy with meaning. Lena stayed in town, testifying in the appeal hearings and working with a civil liberties group trying to get the conviction overturned posthumously. Rafik, reluctant at first, found himself pulled into the momentum. Meetings with lawyers. News interviews. Radio call-ins. He became the voice his brother never had. And every night, Lena sat across from him on the old bookstore couch, helping him fold flyers and drink too much tea. "This place still smells like cinnamon and forgotten dreams," she'd joke. "You still smell like my favorite mistake," he'd reply without thinking. She didn't slap him. She kissed him. They made love for the first time in years on the floor of the storeroom, surrounded by crates of used books and memories. It was desperate and aching and full of apologies that never needed words. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered against his neck. He cupped her face, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. You left, Lena. And I hated you for it. I hated me too. He kissed her again. Gentler this time. But you're here now. 2 weeks later, the appellate court overturned Amir Daw's conviction. His name would be cleared. His record erased. But nothing could erase the weight of what they'd lost. At the candlelight vigil outside City Hall, Rafiq stood beside Lena, holding a framed photo of his brother. We didn't get to bring him home, he said, voice hoarse from speaking. But today, we brought back the truth. As the crowd lit their candles, he felt Lena's hand slip into his. Warm. The first thing June Park remembered about his father was silence. Not the soft, comforting kind. But the heavy silence that filled a room like smoke. Thick. Choking. Full of things left unsaid. His father had been a decorated journalist, Park Hyun-woo, the man who exposed corporate corruption in the late 90s, who wrote with sharp honesty and once stood shoulder to shoulder with Nobel laureates. But at home, he was a ghost. Distant. Proud. Unreachable. June had spent his life chasing his father's legacy. But he never expected it would lead him into a courtroom in Baltimore, filming the final interviews of a dying woman whose only son had been wrongfully executed 2 decades earlier. The woman's name was Mrs. Camille Desrosiers. And her son's name was Elian. A name now synonymous with one of the justice system's most catastrophic failures. The camera's running, June said gently. Mrs. Desrosiers sat in her recliner, oxygen tank hissing faintly beside her, skin paper thin and translucent. She looked at June with eyes that had seen too much. They took my boy when he was 17, she began, voice brittle. Said he killed a white girl behind the gas station. But he was home with me. Eating leftover jambalaya and watching some damn soap opera. She closed her eyes. They didn't care. They wanted someone to blame. And Elian? He looked guilty. He was brown. Poor. Didn't speak well. That's all they needed. June nodded. He had heard versions of this story before, names changed, details shifted, but the core remained the same. What made you reach out to us now? He asked. Mrs. Desrosiers opened her eyes slowly and reached for a small metal box beneath her chair. Because, I found something. Her fingers shook as she handed him a stack of old photographs and a sealed envelope. My boy's attorney was some hotshot fresh out of school. Full of fire. I didn't trust him. But Elian liked him. She gestured to the photos. June flipped through them, grainy shots of a young black teenager smiling, holding a cat, laughing on a stoop. Then came a picture of the attorney. June's blood went cold. He knew that face. Not from this case. From a photograph on the mantel of his childhood home. His father. This is my dad. Mrs. Desrosiers looked up sharply. You're Hyun-woo Park's boy. Yeah, June said, stunned. How did I not know he was involved in this case? Because they sealed the records, she said. And your father signed the agreement. June stared at the documents long after he'd left the house. They were copies of original trial transcripts, unedited, before the edits were made official. Notes in the margins. Things scratched out. One line stood out. Defense counsel admits exculpatory evidence found but deemed inadmissible under procedural rule, recommends silence to protect client from further damage. In his father's handwriting. June read the words over and over until they blurred. His father hadn't hidden the truth out of malice. He'd buried it out of fear. And shame. June didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor of his apartment, laptop open, the footage of Mrs. Desrosiers looping on his screen. Outside, the city hummed with distant sirens and the occasional shout, but none of it reached him. When he finally closed the laptop, the sun was rising. He had a decision to make. 2 days later, June stood outside a cafe in D.C., fidgeting with the strap of his camera bag. He was waiting for her. Katia DeRosier. Elian's younger sister. She had reached out after hearing from her mother that a journalist was digging into the case. She wanted to help. Wanted answers. Wanted justice. What she didn't know was that June came with a confession 20 years overdue. Mr. Park. He turned. She was shorter than he expected, with sharp cheekbones and defiant curls pulled into a bun. Her posture was straight, confident, her eyes unreadable. "You must be Katia," he said. "You're younger than I expected," she replied. "And you're more intimidating than I was warned." She cracked a smile. "Good." They shook hands and sat down at a corner table. He ordered black coffee. She got a chai latte. "So," she said after a beat. "You're making a documentary about my brother." "Yes." "Why now?" "Because someone should have done it a long time ago," he said. "And because I found something." He slid a copy of the trial transcript across the table. She scanned the page slowly. Then again. Her expression hardened. "Your father?" He nodded. "Why didn't he say anything?" "I don't know," June admitted. "But I think it broke him. In a quiet, invisible way. He stopped writing soon after. Started drinking. Stopped coming home. I thought he didn't care." "Maybe he cared too much," she said quietly. They spent the next week together, reviewing evidence, interviewing surviving witnesses, reconstructing the timeline. Katia was sharp, organized, focused, relentless. But something unexpected began to happen between the facts and the long hours and the late-night editing sessions. They started to laugh. They started to talk about music, and childhood, and what it means to carry someone else's sins. They started to fall. June tried to ignore it. Tried to remind himself that she was the sister of the boy his father had failed. But the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to keep the walls up. One night, after a particularly brutal editing session, they sat in his apartment watching grainy surveillance footage frame by frame. June rubbed his eyes. "I keep thinking, what if we miss something? What if there's a clue right in front of us and we're too tired to see it?" Katia leaned back. "You've done more in 1 month than most people did in 20 years. Stop punishing yourself." "I'm not punishing myself," he said, though it came out unconvincing. "You are," she said gently. "You're trying to atone for your father." He looked at her, tired and raw. "Can you blame me?" "No," she said softly. "Because I'm trying to avenge my brother." They sat in silence. Then she reached for his hand. It was a small gesture. But it was enough. They kissed for the first time in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by files and coffee mugs and flickering screens. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't scripted. But it was real. The documentary premiered 6 months later. A Lie in His Shadow opened to a standing ovation at a film festival in New York. But the real victory came a month later, when the governor issued a formal apology to the DeRosier family and reopened the case under new forensic review. The truth had finally come to light. And with it, something else. June and Katia stood together outside the courthouse, fingers intertwined. "Your father would be proud," Katia said. June shook his head. "He'd be ashamed. But he'd also be relieved. I think he carried this longer than any of us realized." "We all carry things we shouldn't," she said. "Some things are worth carrying," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And then he kissed her. Not as a journalist. Not as a son. But as a man finally stepping out of the shadow of another man's silence. Cassidy Mireille knew better than to fall for someone who lived in a courtroom. But then again, Cassidy also knew better than to show up at trials with a tape recorder and a heart that bruised too easily. She was 32, with a reputation for exposing the cracks in institutions that wore justice like a mask. Her columns in the Atlantic Review had earned her 2 journalism awards and 4 lawsuits, none of which stuck. But this trial was different. This one had a face. And a voice that made her forget how to take notes. The defendant was 23. His name was Tavon Glass, and the evidence against him was thin. He was accused of shooting an off-duty cop during a botched robbery, except there were no fingerprints, no motive, and the security footage that could have exonerated him was mysteriously unavailable. Cassidy smelled the truth like blood in water. But it wasn't Tavon who drew her attention. It was Enzo Salgado, the defense attorney. He stood in court like he belonged there, not in the arrogant way of those born into legacy, but like a man who had fought too hard to quit now. Sharp suits, sharper mind, soft voice. She watched him work from the gallery like someone watching fire from behind glass. Close enough to feel the heat. Never close enough to burn. Until one day, he turned around after a recess and caught her watching. "You take notes like a novelist," he said, sliding into the seat beside her in the corridor. Cassidy blinked. "Excuse me. You don't just transcribe. You listen. You write down tone. Tension. People's tells." "Guilty," she said with a slight smile. "I write stories, not summaries." "Good. We need more storytellers." Enzo leaned back, stretching out long legs in tailored navy slacks. "Cassidy Mire, right? I've read your piece on the Stroud Juvenile Center. You remember that?" "I read everything." She couldn't tell if he was flirting or just observant. Both, probably. They crossed paths again. And again. Until passing glances turned to conversations, and then coffee outside the courthouse, and eventually, dinners at the quiet wine bar down the block. He called her, the truth digger. She called him, the wall. Because no matter how much time they spent together, Enzo never talked about his past. Until the night she found him on the courthouse steps after midnight, tie loose, hands shaking. "Tavon's alibi fell through," he said quietly. "And the prosecution just submitted a new witness." "A surprise witness?" Cassidy asked, already sensing foul play. "Someone who came forward with a confession, a cellmate, conveniently released 3 days ago." Cassidy's reporter brain flared like a live wire. "Someone paid him." Enzo didn't reply. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "I've lost clients before," he whispered. "But I can't lose this one. Not him." She had never heard him sound so raw. The next morning, Cassidy went hunting. Press badges could only get you so far, but she had her ways. By nightfall, she had names. A judge with 2 campaign donors tied to the prosecution. A missing file from the public defender's office. A surveillance tape that had not been destroyed, but was sitting in an evidence room mislabeled as inconclusive. She brought it all to Enzo. He looked at her like she'd just pulled breath from the ocean. "How did you find this?" "You forget," she said, "I'm a professional." "And you," he said, brushing her hair from her face, "are terrifying." She smiled. "You like terrifying." He didn't answer. He just kissed her. Tavon Glass was acquitted 3 days later. When the verdict was read, his mother collapsed into tears. Enzo stayed composed, offering a quiet nod to the jury. Cassidy watched it all from the back row, her pen forgotten in her lap. Outside the courtroom, he found her. "You saved that boy," she said. "We did," he corrected. Their kiss in the marble hallway was quiet, and urgent, and full of the kind of promise neither of them dared say out loud. 2 weeks later, Cassidy's exposé on the judicial corruption in Tavon's case went live. It sparked outrage. The judge was placed under investigation. The prosecution suspended. New reviews were ordered in 3 other cases the same witness had testified in. Enzo showed up at her door that night with takeout and the softest look she'd ever seen. "I don't like people seeing me like you see me," he said as she opened the door. "Why?" "Because you don't flinch." Cassidy leaned against the frame. "Should I?" "No," he said. "I just don't know what to do with someone who sees past the performance. You let them see the hero. I see the cracks. Doesn't mean either is less true." He took her hand. "Come with me to the coast next month. Just you and me. No trials. No stories. No ghosts." He smiled. "Maybe just the good kind." They spent 3 days by the water, walking quiet beaches and sharing confessions between glasses of wine and windblown laughter. He told her about the first client he lost. How he quit law for a year. How he came back because he realized silence was worse than loss. She told him about the story that got her first death threat. How she burned out at 29. How she rebuilt herself one article at a time. At night, they made love like it meant something. Because it did. One morning, months later, Cassidy woke to find Enzo sitting at her kitchen table, reading the paper. His expression was unreadable. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for his hand. He turned the front page toward her. "Witness in glass trial found dead, suicide suspected." Cassidy's blood went cold. "Enzo." "It's not over," he said, voice hard now. "Someone cleaned up a loose end." Cassidy swallowed. "What do we do?" He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. "We don't stop."